Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today at Future. My name is Tina Mulqueen, and I'm excited to be here to talk about culture communications. And when I talk about culture communications, I'm really referring to two separate but related concepts. One is everything that we say inside of an organization that fosters and reinforces that organization's culture. And the second is everything that we say as a brand outside of the organization that informs our behavior in society at large, or our larger culture. So a little bit about me. I founded a company called Kindred PR, and we are a full-service communications and marketing company that specializes in corporate social responsibility and inclusive messaging, both inside and outside of organizations. So put another way, what we do is we take the DEI work inside of organizations and we bring it to life through communications. And sometimes that means that we have to create infrastructures for that kind of communication to take place inside of organizations and align stakeholders in the executive suite and also HR to make sure that that infrastructure is sustainable. So this talk is for marketers who want to tell authentic and responsible stories related to inclusion, sustainability, and other corporate social responsibility initiatives that foster healthy cultures both inside of their organizations and as it relates to society at large. So I am both a romantic and also an astronomy nerd. So I'm going to start today's talk with a Valentine's Day story from space. And it's one of my favorite stories. So on February 14th in 1990, the famed astronomer Carl Sagan had the idea when Voyager 1 was 13.7 billion miles away from our sun to have Voyager turn its camera back on and capture a shot of the Earth from that distance. And the result of that was the image that you see before you here. And you can see the Earth as just a speck of blue light, and it was no bigger than a pixel in the image. And honestly, the image is relatively underwhelming, and that's the point. So Sagan, he was a famed astronomer, but he also was an incredible science communicator. And he knew the impact that this image would have on the people back home that were able to see it. He knew that people would have this feeling of humility and also connectedness and unity with one another. So in his book entitled The Pale Blue Dot, which was inspired by this image, he goes on to say, "There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known." The impact of Sagan's foresight and message should not be understated. The American Museum of Natural History called Sagan the most effective public advocate for the values of science the world has ever seen. I'll make a case that this is also one of the most impactful messages on environmental sustainability and also inclusion, connectedness to humankind. When I think about the work that I do and fostering a sentiment of unity and inclusion, I think about Sagan. So if I'm making a case that Sagan was one of our most effective communicators and advocates, what can we learn from him and this image of his pale blue dot? Lesson 1, turn the camera around. So as marketers, we're often trained to look outside at what's happening around us. It's something that's ingrained in us as marketers. We look for trends in the news to respond to keep us relevant. We look to our consumers to teach us what to sell and how to sell it. We look to our competitors to figure out how to position in the marketplace. We build our ad campaigns around what's going on outside. And looking outside is what Voyager 1 was designed to do. In fact, its primary mission was to study the outer solar system. You can't get much more outside than that. It had completed that mission when it was leaving the solar system, and it was commanded by NASA to turn its camera around and take an image of the Earth. For the purpose of this talk, think of turning the camera around as looking inward at your organization. When something is going on outside in our culture, especially when it's related to environmental sustainability, when it's related to social justice issues, or has serious implications in society, look inward at your culture. How does this issue impact your employees? Is there space in your organization to have these vulnerable conversations? Is your culture explicitly or implicitly aligned around these issues? And if you don't know the answer to any of those questions, then it's a good sign to hit pause on anything that you're going to say externally. Another important litmus test might be if you're thinking about responding to an issue publicly as an organization. If you're inclined to do so, draft an email internally to your employees first. Don't send it, just draft it. And read it and think about how it will land with your employees. If it's going to take you more than a couple of paragraphs to explain the context behind why you're sending an email, then it's probably a good idea to press pause and look at your culture internally and figure out if you need to do some cultural work before you do any additional advocacy work. So the next lesson is related, and it's about sharing authentically. I almost don't even like the word authenticity anymore because it's such a marketing buzzword, but it's absolutely crucial when it comes to corporate social responsibility. For example, in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, brands spoke up in droves, mostly on social media, in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. There was both an implicit and at times an absolutely explicit call from consumers for brands to take this stance and to speak up to affect social change. And many brands responded, and some of those brands experienced intense backlash from audiences and consumers because they were seen as hypocritical in sharing the sentiments. The primary feedback was that these brands hadn't done enough to change the status quo within their organizations in order to speak out as allies. So marketers, communications professionals, and executives often ask me about this paradox. They understand that consumers, particularly younger consumers in the millennial generation and Generation Z, increasingly expect us as brands to take a stand on these social issues. Yet when we do, we may be scrutinized for our action or more commonly for our inaction. So how do we share advocacy and allyship responsibly? The answer is that once we do the inward work, so once we turn the camera around and we do that work inside of our cultures, which we could have an entire other conversation about how to set up those infrastructures. But once you have that culture in place and once you really feel comfortable sharing externally, what you want to do is share authentic pieces of your culture as a brand. So going back to our Valentine's Day story, at NASA, Sagan didn't just have a hunch that an image of the Earth from a great distance would cause a profound impact on the people that saw it. In fact, astronauts have a term to define that phenomenon. It's called the overview effect. It's a feeling of unity and connectedness to humanity that results from seeing our planet from space. And it's something that is so ingrained in the culture at NASA that even during wartime, scientists from opposing cultures can set aside their perceived differences in pursuit of scientific advancement. So Sagan was sharing something that was germane to the culture at NASA, and he was inviting the rest of the world to share in this culture and experience. When you share authentic pieces of a culture that's inclusive, the results are impactful for both your employees and your audience. Your employees will feel a powerful connection to what you've created, and they'll want to share that. And that can be a really powerful thing for your culture as well. Lesson 3, show, don't tell. So astronauts have long talked about the overview effect, but the image of the pale blue dot was so much more impactful than a secondhand account of this psychological phenomenon. And it's the same for marketers and corporate communicators. When we're inclined to say something about a social issue, saying it with our actions is often more impactful. And usually actions by corporations that are authentic and show that an organization is at stake for a particular issue are well received. But there's more to consider when we think about how we're showing up in society. And often, showcasing the culture of an organization is about listening to and empowering employees and connecting to the fact that our employees are our most impactful brand ambassadors, for better or worse. When an organization has a culture that's aligned around social responsibility, it will be evident by the behavior of employees. Listening to them and amplifying their voices can lead to powerful change within an organization and also lead to transformations in the culture at large. And this is an important idea because we don't tend often to connect to the notion that organizations are important and impactful microcosms of society. And the way that we behave and what we accept within those organizations ends up becoming what we expect outside of organizations and how we expect for structures to behave in our culture at large. So making sure to model the appropriate behavior inside organizations can be a really transformative thing. Our fourth lesson is to connect to humanity. And when I say connect to humanity, I mean that as marketers, we tend to always want to connect to and engage consumers. And when we think about consumers as humans, it can shift our perspective a bit because we end up included. We're now in this vision that we want to market to. So when it comes to being socially responsible, we need to move away from that focus on consumers and toward the concept of truly building a better world and a world that we want to inhabit. In other words, when it comes to corporate social responsibility, shift the marketing paradigm from reactive to proactive. As marketers, we tend to look at the consumer population to tell us what to do. We analyze and reanalyze consumer data and build marketing campaigns and messaging that we know will incite them to act. And I'm not saying to move away from analyzing data. In fact, I'm an advocate of the ethical use of data to serve consumers. But when it comes to corporate social responsibility campaigns, data doesn't cut it. Instead of responding to what consumers want, we want to proactively create a culture that's better for them. I doubt that Sagan had it in his mind that his famous image would help sell Jeeps. But in 2020, 30 years after the pale blue dot image was captured, marketers from Jeep called Sagan's widow and asked to license excerpts from his speech in a campaign to introduce the Wrangler 4xe, the first electric Jeep Wrangler. By July, the 4xe had sold out for 2021 and even outperformed the Toyota Prius in quarterly sales. Connecting to impact on society will allow us to make progress in a way that consumers will organically want to align with. And our final lesson, we're all in this together. So I'd like to close the talk today by reading an excerpt from Sagan's pale blue dot. Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and voyager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in the vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all the generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become a momentary master of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner, how frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity and all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Fortunately, we do have each other. So, this is your call to action to model responsibly, to share authentically, and to invite people along for your journey of corporate social responsibility. And if you would like to join me in our pursuit of building a better world through communications, please reach out. We're all in this together.